When the HOA blocked his essential roof repairs and imposed crippling fines, John's act of defiance ignited a community uprising. Discover how one stand against injustice transformed fear into a fight for fairness. John Miller had always cherished his modest, time-worn home, a legacy passed down from his late father and filled with the echoes of family memories. Every corner of the house, from the creaking wooden floors to the time-faded photographs lining the hallway, was a testament to generations of care and hard work. The property stood as a sanctuary, a symbol of perseverance in a world that often seemed indifferent to the value of tradition and personal history. On a particularly gloomy afternoon, dark, heavy clouds loomed over the neighborhood as if forewarning of an impending storm. John, busy with his daily routine, was momentarily distracted by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window panes. It was then that he noticed a series of unsightly water stains slowly expanding across the once bright ceiling of his living room. Each stain was a silent but ominous warning that the aging roof, already showing signs of wear from years of relentless exposure, was now failing under nature's pressure. A deep sense of foreboding washed over John as he contemplated the potential dangers. The roof, a critical component of the safety his family depended on, was deteriorating faster than he had ever imagined. Without immediate attention, the structural integrity of the home could be compromised, putting at risk not only the cherished memories it held, but, more importantly, the well-being of his loved ones. Driven by both duty and desperation, John immediately reached out to a trusted contractor, someone who had earned his respect over years of reliable service. He scheduled an urgent inspection, hoping that prompt repairs might stave off the worst of the damage. In his heart, he believed that taking swift, decisive action would not only secure his family's shelter, but also honor the legacy of the home. However, the situation took an unexpected and bitter turn. Within a few days, a stark, impersonal notice arrived by mail from the local Homeowners Association, HOA. The document, printed on sterile paper and adorned with the association's official insignia, outlined a series of rigid stipulations. It informed John that any repair work on the roof required prior written approval, a permission he had already sought through the proper channels but had been summarily denied. The notice went further, threatening that any water damage incurred by proceeding with the repairs without consent would result in severe fines. Reading the notice, John felt an overwhelming mix of frustration and betrayal. Here was the very organization that was supposed to safeguard the community's interests, now imposing bureaucratic hurdles on the protection of his own home. The language of the letter was devoid of empathy. It was a cold, calculated directive that reduced his personal crisis to a mere procedural infraction. The realization hit him hard. His right to maintain a safe and secure living environment was being undermined by a system that prioritized control over compassion. In that moment, John's mind raced through memories of simpler times, when a community's strength lay in mutual support rather than in oppressive regulations. The contrast between the warmth of his family's history and the stark, impersonal mandates of the HOA could not have been more jarring. The seeds of injustice had been sown, and John knew that this was only the beginning of a struggle that would test not only his resolve, but also the very fabric of community trust. As the rain continued its relentless descent, John sat quietly in the dim light of his living room, contemplating his next move. The painful reality was clear. If he were to preserve his home and protect his family, he would have to challenge the very authority that now loomed over him. The spark of injustice had been ignited, setting in motion a battle that promised to be as much about reclaiming personal dignity as it was about defending one's right to a safe haven. After receiving that cold, bureaucratic notice laden with threats of fines and further penalties, John realized his predicament was not an isolated incident. It was a glaring symptom of a deep-rooted systemic injustice. Determined not to succumb to fear or passivity, he dove into the HOA's documents with unwavering resolve. Meticulously reviewing every clause and regulation, John noticed how vague phrases such as administrative discretion granted the association broad, almost unchecked authority. These legal loopholes allowed them to impose arbitrary conditions that ignored the genuine needs of homeowners. Refusing to fight this battle alone, John began reaching out to his neighbors. As he went door to door, he discovered that his story was far from unique. Many residents had received mysterious notices, faced unwarranted fines, and even endured intrusive attempts to control aspects of their private lives. Each testimony painted a consistent picture. The HOA was methodically consolidating its power, using the same tactics to suppress any hint of homeowner initiative. John started documenting every detail with precision. He snapped photographs of the damage, carefully archived every letter and notice, and recorded the reluctant testimonies of neighbors too fearful to confront the association openly. These documents were no longer just pieces of paper. They were emblems of resistance, tangible proof that he was not alone in his struggle for justice. As the tension in the neighborhood grew, so did the collective unrest. More and more residents began sharing their own accounts of the HOA's overreach, and it quickly became clear that what began as a personal crisis was evolving into a unified stand against arbitrary power. John's initial frustration transformed into a resolute determination to expose the systemic abuses at play. Armed with a growing body of evidence, John decided to seek legal counsel. He met with an experienced attorney specializing in property rights, who pored over the amassed documentation with a critical eye. The lawyer confirmed that the HOA's actions were not merely unfair, they potentially violated legal standards. This validation not only fortified John's moral stance, but also provided him with the legal ammunition necessary to challenge the oppressive system. Every new piece of evidence, every additional testimony, only deepened John's resolve. He understood that his fight for his home, and for the rights of every resident in his community, was just beginning. The storm of change was imminent, and John was ready to confront the looming injustice head-on, determined to reclaim control over his life and property. Armed with a meticulously compiled dossier of evidence and bolstered by a coalition of equally frustrated neighbors, John scheduled a formal meeting with the HOA board, a confrontation that would mark a turning point in the struggle for his home. The meeting was held in a cramped community hall, where tension and anticipation filled the air. Rows of concerned residents sat silently, their eyes fixed on the stage where the battle for truth was about to unfold. At the front, the HOA board assembled in a display of bureaucratic formality, led by the imposing figure of Karen Dalton. With rehearsed precision, Karen and her colleagues presented their case, reciting obscure clauses and policy language meant to justify their arbitrary decisions. Their arguments, however, quickly unraveled under the weight of the undeniable evidence John had gathered. Photographs of the deteriorating roof, copies of the disconcerting correspondence, and testimonies from other homeowners painted a vivid picture of systemic neglect and manipulation. The pivotal moment came when an independent inspector, summoned on John's insistence, stepped forward to testify. His detailed report confirmed that the roof's condition posed a serious safety hazard, a fact that had been conveniently ignored by the HOA until now. As his words reverberated through the room, murmurs of shock and indignation rippled among the audience. It was as if the collective conscience of the community had awakened, demanding accountability for the dangers that had been lurking in plain sight. John, steadfast and resolute, methodically dismantled each of the HOA's claims. The evidence left little room for rebuttal, exposing the board's selective enforcement of rules and its willingness to prioritize control over the well-being of residents. The oppressive facade maintained by the HOA began to crumble, revealing a system more concerned with profit and power than with protecting its own community. In that charged atmosphere, the meeting transformed into a powerful display of collective resistance. Every piece of evidence, every corroborating testimony, reinforced the message that no individual should be left to suffer in silence while institutions trample on personal rights. The standoff was not just a confrontation. It was a declaration that the community would no longer tolerate injustice. The seeds of change had been sown, and with the momentum of truth behind him, John took one step closer to reclaiming his home and restoring dignity to his neighborhood. After months of gathering irrefutable evidence and with the community rallying behind him, John's fight reached the courtroom. The legal battle became a charged arena where every shred of documentation and testimony against the HOA was laid bare. In a packed courtroom filled with anxious neighbors and determined citizens, John's attorney presented a compelling case that meticulously detailed the arbitrary fines, unauthorized actions, and blatant disregard for homeowner safety. One by one, witnesses took the stand. An independent structural engineer provided a damning report on the deteriorated roof, confirming that the neglect not only endangered John's family, but also posed a wider threat to the community. Every piece of evidence pointed to one incontrovertible fact: the HOA had overstepped its bounds, exploiting legal loopholes to serve its own interests rather than the welfare of residents. As the proceedings unfolded, the judge's stern gaze and measured tone left no doubt about the gravity of the situation. Legal arguments that once appeared abstract were now transformed into a clear narrative of injustice. The courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably when the judge acknowledged the systemic abuse of power by the HOA, a recognition that resonated deeply with every homeowner present. When the verdict was finally delivered, it was nothing short of a triumph for justice. The court ruled emphatically in John's favor, declaring the HOA's actions not only unlawful, but also morally indefensible. The fines were rescinded, the unauthorized rules annulled, and the HOA was ordered to compensate for the damages incurred by its negligence. This landmark decision not only vindicated John's personal struggle, but also sent a resounding message to the entire community. No one was above the law. In that decisive moment, as the gavel struck and the judge pronounced the verdict, a palpable wave of relief and empowerment swept through the courtroom. Neighbors, who had long felt silenced and powerless, now saw a clear path toward reclaiming their rights. For John, the victory was deeply personal, a reaffirmation of his right to safeguard his home and legacy. The oppressive grip of the HOA began to crumble, replaced by the promise of a community where fairness and accountability reigned supreme. Justice, it turned out, was not an abstract ideal, but a tangible, hard-won victory. A beacon of hope that inspired every homeowner to stand up for their rights and demand transparency from those in power. In the wake of the courtroom victory, the community experienced a transformation that went far beyond the resolution of one homeowner's struggle. The oppressive influence of the former HOA board crumbled, and in its place, a new spirit of transparency, accountability, and collective action took root. In the following weeks, residents came together with renewed determination. Town hall meetings, once shrouded in intimidation and secrecy, became vibrant forums for honest discussion and debate. Homeowners from every corner of the neighborhood gathered to voice their concerns, propose reforms, and craft a new governance model that truly reflected the community's interests. The new board, elected through a fair and transparent process, prioritized open communication and equitable decision-making, ensuring that every resident's opinion was heard. John Miller, whose personal battle had ignited this widespread movement, emerged as a local hero. His journey from frustration to victory resonated deeply with his neighbors. Many found courage in his example, and soon, community groups and watchdog committees were established to oversee future HOA actions and protect homeowners' rights. The collective effort transformed the neighborhood into a living example of what can be achieved when people unite against injustice. Over time, the tangible changes became evident. Outdated regulations were replaced with homeowner-friendly policies, and the new leadership implemented strict safeguards to prevent any future abuses of power. Public spaces were revitalized, and a sense of trust began to replace the old atmosphere of fear and resignation. The legacy of the legal battle was not only the repaired homes and rescinded fines, but also a reinvigorated community that understood its own strength. John's story, once a solitary fight against an overreaching authority, had evolved into a powerful narrative of empowerment and reform. His victory proved that even deeply entrenched systems could be challenged and reformed when united by a common purpose. As the neighborhood continued to thrive under this new era of collective governance, the community carried forward a legacy of vigilance, solidarity, and the enduring belief that justice, when pursued with determination, can transform lives and redefine the future.